Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's Live at 5. My name is Stanley Philippe. Very happy that you were able to tune in and join us this evening for a conversation that's been really at the top of our minds. Constantly, but really over the last year or so, there's been a lot of discussions, a lot of conversations about diversity and inclusion. And those conversations haven't escaped us here at Carleton University. It's always something that we are striving to learn, to improve, and to celebrate. And so this afternoon or this evening, what we're going to do is get a chance to take a step back and have a conversation about diversity and inclusion and what that means and what we're trying to do to again improve our kind of outlook for our community members here at Carleton University. And as always, it's always more fun when we get to hear from you. And so we really want to hear what you're thinking about when you hear the terms diversity and inclusion, how much of an impact it's going to play in your decision-making process, what you're looking forward to discovering and learning while you're in university. So use that live event Q&A, ask us your questions. We have some folks here that are going to be able to answer some of your questions behind the scenes. And also our featured guest we'll be able to answer some of your questions live during today's event. So really looking forward to that conversation. Now, speaking of celebrating and really thinking about what type of community we want to be, I think it's fitting that we now go into our land acknowledgement. And Carleton University does acknowledge the location of its campus on the traditional unceded territories of the Algonquin Nation. And every day that you hear about some of the different changes that are happening at Carleton, it's really heartwarming, exciting. It's great to be able to be in a place that is taking this land acknowledgement very, very seriously and trying to implement real change in the community. And of course, no one's perfect, no organization is perfect, but I think that there's a real kind of effort and a real awareness that's happening at Carleton with regards to not only, again, acknowledging our location, but making sure that those communities are a big part of what we do moving forward. So really glad to be able to kind of set the tone for today's event with this acknowledgement. Okay. I am not the person you're going to be seeing mostly today. We're very happy to have Jamie Sadgrove, who is the coordinator in Carleton's Department of Equity and Inclusive Communities. Jamie is a trans and non-binary gender inclusion coordinator, goes by the pronouns they and them. And Jamie is a great speaker, great presenter. We had a chance to actually present the last time we were kind of in a real kind of live setting at the University Fair in Toronto last year, so in 2019. So I guess it was a little bit 2 years ago, and has a lot of really great things to say. So I'm going to give Jamie the spotlight, and again, we'll get a chance to have a conversation and answer some of your questions. So if you have any questions for Jamie about, again, the inclusive and equity components of our school, please utilize the live event Q&A to ask those questions. Okay, now we'll actually stop talking. The next person you're going to see on the screen is Jamie.
Hi, everyone. So like Sten said, my name's Jamie. I use they, them pronouns. Thanks so much, Stanley, for that introduction. So I work at Carleton as the Trans and Non-Binary Inclusion Coordinator within the Department of Equity and Inclusive Communities. And that job title is a little bit of a mouthful, but basically what it means is I'm responsible for working on projects that are aiming to make Carleton a safer and more welcoming and more inclusive place for trans and non-binary folks. So that includes students, faculty, staff, community members. So I'll talk a little bit more about my role in a second, but first I just wanted to kind of chat a little bit about my journey at Carleton. I did my undergrad at Carleton. I graduated last year in 2020 with a Bachelor of Communication and Media Studies, and I worked lots of student jobs on campus while I was at Carleton. And I found my passion for working in equity and inclusion work while I was working in residence, and that's kind of what led me to my role now. When I was in second year, I came out as non-binary, and I felt really supported by my community at Carleton, both my professional coworkers and my peers. And so that kind of gave me the desire to want to give back to Carleton's community, and this role feels like a really wonderful way to get to do that. So I work under Equity and Inclusive Communities. That's the department I'm a part of. And our role at kind of a really high level is working to make campus safer for all students, faculty, and staff, especially those from marginalized backgrounds. And we have 3 centers of focus. So that's equity and inclusion promotion, human rights accommodation and response, and sexual violence prevention and survivor support. And we work on those things through lots of different strategies. So that includes everything from high-level planning, meeting with the president and VPs of the university to work equity into the larger scope mission of the university, trainings and workshops for faculty and staff and student leaders, consulting on policy development and new initiatives on campus, and then also planning events around equity and inclusion. And then the last part of that is when something happens that makes someone feel unsafe or unwelcomed on campus, our office also handles peer support and case resolution in those cases. I feel really lucky to get to be a part of the equity team. The folks I work with are awesome. They're all really passionate and really committed to that kind of central goal. And within my role specifically, the Trans Inclusion Coordinator role, what that means is I focus on 8 different things across campus that we kind of determined are the most important areas of focus to make campus safer for trans folks. So those 8 things, let me see if I can remember them off the top of my head. It's bathrooms, athletics, residents, health and counseling, education and training, policy development, digital infrastructure, and outreach, which includes the development of a trans hub. So some of those things are really facilities related and making sure the brick and mortar of the university are accommodating to trans folks. For example, working on getting more gender neutral washrooms renovated and built on campus, especially in areas that are super high traffic for students, like outside big lecture halls. Working to make sure health and counseling is inclusive for trans folks, and athletics, stuff like intramurals and changing rooms. Also working on training and education for faculty and staff so they know how to support trans folks in their classroom and outside the classroom on campus. And then digital infrastructure is stuff like forms, or when you log into CU Learn, which is like our online learning toolkit, making sure that students see their name and not a name that they don't use anymore. And a really big part of that work, like I mentioned, is building an online trans hub. So that's something that's still under construction. You can find it at carleton.ca/trans. Right now, there's a couple things live and more coming. But the aim of that website is to be sort of a one-stop shop, if you will, for anything that trans folks would need to feel safer on campus. So everything from where can I find all the gender neutral washrooms, to how can I start hormone therapy, to what are some clothing stores or salons in Ottawa that are trans inclusive. And then also, if students do experience transphobia on campus, that website provides them a way to kind of let us know that, so that I can then triage that and make sure those students get the support they need. That's kind of in a nutshell what I do and what Equity does. We also, like I mentioned, host a lot of events throughout the year. We had Carleton's first ever Inclusion Week in November of 2020. Sexual Assault Awareness Week was in February, and we held a lot of events for Black History Month as well. Coming up on March 23rd, we have the official launch of Carleton's Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Action Plan, which is a document that was worked on throughout the second half of 2020 and is really kind of a broad, wide-ranging document that governs how EDI should be approached all over campus. So that's being formally launched at the end of the month. And then as well, kind of closer to my heart, to do with Trans Day of Visibility, which is on March 31st. We have 2 events coming up. So on March 30th, the Institute of Interdisciplinary Studies, which is a faculty unit at Carleton, is hosting the author and educator Kai Cheng Tom for a talk. And then on March 31st, as a kind of follow-up to that, we're hosting a panel on how cisgender faculty, staff, and students can make campus safer for trans people in their work. And that panel is going to feature some Carleton alumni, some community members, and some current students. So I'm super excited for that. You can find more details on the Trans Hub, so carleton.ca/trans. If students need support, they can reach out to us via our email, which is equity@carleton.ca, or if they want to talk to us over the phone or in person when we're back on campus, you can find that info on our website, which is carleton.ca/equity. And then the one other thing I want to mention is if students are looking to get involved and kind of find community, whether they're queer and trans students or students from another marginalized group, CUSA's service centers are a really great way to go. So CUSA's are undergraduate student government. They run a bunch of service centers kind of targeted at helping marginalized folks on campus. So two that I want to spotlight, or three actually, are the Gender and Sexuality Resource Center, the Racialized and International Student Experience, or RISE, and the Carleton Disability Awareness Center. So like it sounds like those are service centers for the queer and trans community, racialized and international students, and students with disabilities. And they run events and trainings and also just kind of provide like a social hub for folks in those communities. So that's kind of my spiel about who I am and what I do. And now I'm excited to hopefully answer some questions.
Thanks for that, Jamie. Yes, and there are some questions, and we of course encourage everyone to keep asking the questions that they may have for Jamie. So let's jump right into the first question I see here is a question about residents. So here is the question. Hi, Jamie. Most first-year residents is based on double occupancy. Is there any consideration for single occupancy for trans and non-binary students?
100%. That's a great question. So this year especially, there's been a lot of accommodation for trans and non-binary students just because of kind of the social distancing requirements of COVID-19, meaning that no one has a roommate. But there are single rooms, and trans and non-binary students are definitely given priority in terms of safety if they feel that that's something that is important to them. There's also the option of gender neutral housing, which is what it sounds like. So typically, students are placed with a student who has the same gender identity as them, but students can also choose to opt into gender neutral housing, which is housing open to students of any gender identity. And basically, in that case, the residence department just blocks off the gender field when they're assigning rooms. So that's another option to consider as well.
Another question, well, it's a comment question. This is inspiring, so that the student is feeling inspired by your talk, and we also wanted to know if you felt okay living in residence, and whether or not other students felt understanding, were welcoming. So maybe you can elaborate more about, your resident experience from the pre-res. How were you feeling about res, and then how it played out as an actual kind of lived experience.
So that's a great question. I didn't actually come out as trans until I was in second year. So when I lived in res in first year, I hadn't kind of figured that out about myself yet. And when I was in second year, I was working as a res fellow, which a lot of other schools call like an RA or a Don. And I was really worried about kind of coming out to the students on my floor and how they were going to receive that and that kind of thing. But both the students I was living with and the other RAs I was working with were really, really supportive and accommodating. I had folks help me kind of change my preferred name in Carleton's system. Something that was really heartwarming for me was I came out over the Christmas break. So before I left, and before I was at home, I wasn't living in res over Christmas. I was back with my parents. And then when I came back to Ottawa, I found that I don't know who it was, whether it was one of the students on my floor or one of my coworkers, had changed the name on my door to be my new name, which was something that to me just kind of encapsulated how safe and welcoming Carleton's residence community is. And I'll say as well that The professional staff working in residence are 100% committed to making residence safe for trans folks, and they have a really robust kind of reporting structure in place in case something does happen.
Jamie, we talk a lot about being in the nation's capital. Can you maybe speak a bit about your Ottawa experience? What was it like being a student in Ottawa as well as on campus? Maybe talk a bit more about that Ottawa connection for you.
For sure. I really enjoyed going to school in Ottawa. I'm a big theater nerd, and so getting to go to the NAC and see touring Broadway productions and like original Canadian theater was awesome. I also think people talk about Ottawa being a little bit sleepy, but I don't think that's the case. And there's like a lot to do, especially like for the queer community. There are like drag shows all the time. There's a drag brunch that normally happens at a tea room in town. So I really enjoyed going to school in Ottawa. And I think as well for folks who, whether you've been to Pride a bunch before, or especially if you've never been to a Pride parade, the Ottawa Pride Parade in August is always so much fun, and getting to attend that and kind of I've attended that as a student as well, and kind of wearing like the Carlton logo. And so getting to be that proud and have my university kind of stand behind who I am was something that was really special to me as well.
Jamie, there's another kind of comment about the residence experience and specifically about the application process with regards to requesting gender neutral housing. If a student is going to request to live on a gender neutral floor, are they able to keep that information confidential? Like, how is that process handled within the office from an administrative perspective?
Yeah, 100%. So gender neutral housing isn't something that's kind of confined to one specific floor or area in residence. Every residence floor can have gender neutral housing. It's something that's just kind of on a case by case basis. But 100% that's something that would be kept confidential. If you chose to tell your res fellow, they would keep that between you and them. But if you wanted to keep that even just to yourself, the folks working in the housing office wouldn't communicate that to anyone. The one thing I would note is that sometimes it's getting better, but sometimes resident staff can maybe see legal names. So if your legal name and your preferred name don't match, that would be something to keep in mind. But no, 100%. One of the things that I learned working in residence is that the university is governed by a federal law that determines what they can and can't share with people about you, and that applies to all university staff. And university staff can't even confirm to someone that you go to Carleton, let alone anything about you. So that it's like a legal thing as well as an ethical thing, that Carleton staff would 100% keep that confidential, and you would get to choose who, if anyone, you wanted to share your transness with.
We're having a conversation with Jamie, who is the Trans and Non-Binary Gender Inclusion Coordinator in Carleton's Department of Equity and Inclusive Communities. And of course, we welcome all of you to ask your questions. If you have any questions that you want to have answered by Jamie live this afternoon. Jamie, you shared a really cool story about graduating this year and how it lined up with some of your siblings. So maybe you can, as we wait for more questions, maybe you can share that story about what was it like having a COVID convocation shared with your family members.
100%. So I have a younger brother and a younger sister. They're 15 and 18 now. And I was living in residence in March when COVID hit, and anyone who could was asked to move out. And I didn't have anywhere else to go, so I moved back home with my parents for a few months. And they live in the GTA, about 45 minutes west of Toronto. And so when that first happened, I was really kind of bummed about it, because it wasn't how I expected my last year of university to end. And I wasn't expecting, obviously, to move back home. But it was actually, in retrospect, I think really special and kind of a silver lining for me that me and my brother and sister got to have those like 4 or 5 months living under the same roof again. Because I moved to Ottawa when I was 17, and they're different people now, right? But if things had happened differently, my little brother would have started university in September, and so I don't know if we ever would have been under the same roof again. And for convocation specifically, they finished grade 8 and grade 12 in June of last year, so we were all graduating at the same time. And my mom kind of decided, you know what, we need to do something to celebrate this. So we ordered sushi, and she made us some fake diplomas, and we took pictures and hung out as a family. And obviously it wasn't the convocation I was expecting, and I'm still looking forward to eventually getting to walk across the big stage in the field house, and wait for 3 hours and do that whole thing. I'm really looking forward to it. But it was kind of nice getting to have that kind of special little private convocation as a family.
I love that story. I can just see the three of you together with that kind of graduation cap on and the whole thing. It's really cool. Before we wrap things up, you mentioned about some of the awesome communities that are available at Carleton and the different department resources. If someone was to enter their first year at Carleton, how easy is it to find those communities, easy to find those resources, and where would they start with that journey?
For sure, that's a great question. So I think I will say that finding communities at Carleton is easy as long as you're willing to do a little bit of work yourself. I think the biggest difference between university and high school is that in high school, and this kind of applies to everything, I think, high school people really kind of chase you down and seek you out, whether it's to join a club or if you have an assignment that's a little bit overdue, teachers will kind of like prompt you to get it submitted. University, you have to kind of do that work for yourself, and that includes kind of going out and finding the communities that you want to be a part of. But something that's really helpful for that in September of every year is Clubs Expo. So basically what happens is I mentioned the field house, which is Carleton's indoor soccer field. It's this huge dome with an artificial field inside. And every September, I think it's like the second or third day of fall orientation, every club and society on campus sets up a folding table in the field house. And it's primarily for first year students, but for students from every year can go to Clubs Expo and kind of find where they think they want to fit into campus. So that includes whether you wanted to get involved with one of those service centers, or if you were looking for something like intramural sports. I'm trying to think of some of the cool clubs on campus. There's a ski and snowboard club that goes to Tremblant normally, like every weekend throughout the school year. There's like a robotics club, all that kind of thing. So there's literally a club for everything. I'm sure you know the number better than me, Sten, but I think it's like over 300 clubs and societies on campus.
That's right.
And for me and most of my really close friends from Carleton, that was kind of where we found our communities, was through Clubs Expo that first week of school.
Now, there was one more question that came in, and you know, I talked at the beginning about, you know, nothing being perfect, you know, and institutions aren't immune to that. So they wanted to know if you had experienced any difficulties at Carleton, and if so, how are you able to address or overcome those difficulties?
For sure, that's a great question. So I'm not going to sugarcoat things and say that things were always perfect, because that's not true. That same year that I came out as trans, I think I've told this story with Sten around before, but it's one that really stands out to me. I don't know if folks in the chat have seen the genderbread person. It's kind of this like graph that's used to explain gender identity and sexuality and stuff. Anyway, when I was a res fellow the first year, we had this poster. It was like a poster that everyone had on their floor, and mine just so happened to be across the hall from my room. And I woke up one morning and went outside, and the poster had been ripped down. And I was really upset. And I posted in our floor Facebook group, and I said, hey, like, I don't know who did this. I'm not gonna like point fingers or have a witch hunt, but I want to say like this is something that affected me personally. And the student who did it ended up coming forward, and we had a really good conversation about it. And it was something he'd done more to be funny, I think, than maliciously, but he hadn't understood the impact that could have. And then I ended up getting a message from this student 6 or 8 months later when he'd moved out of the floor and he was in second year. I hadn't seen him in quite a while. And he had been a member of the Conservative Party. But this was the year that the Ontario Conservatives voted to have sex as defined as biological in their party constitution as a policy point. And he sent me a message and said that when that happened, he felt he had no choice but to leave the party because he had come to really care for and appreciate the queer community and feel that it was something that was important for him to stand with. And for him, that was a bridge too far. And so I think obviously that was a hard experience at the time, but I think I was really glad that I got to have that productive conversation with that student and that he came out of it kind of thinking about the world, I think, in a little bit of a kinder way.
That's really, it's an amazing story because it speaks to the intention of university, which is to go in it with a perspective and then to learn and to grow and to be able to hopefully, change your perspective in a way that's more reflective of what you want your society to look like. There was one more question that came in, and forgive me for my ignorance, but the question was, are there GSA clubs at Carleton or something similar? So if you can maybe answer that question.
For sure. So the closest thing to a GSA on campus would be the Gender and Sexuality Resource Center. And they are kind of like an active service center, but it's also a social space. They have study tables and couches and a TV, and I think they have a Wii. And they actually have the largest queer library in Ottawa, which is pretty dope. But it's a space just in the university center where you can go and hang out and meet people who are part of the same community as you and have had similar experiences to you. And then they also host events, and some of those are educational, but some of them are just social events. So I know in the past they've done LGBT movie nights and sex toy bingo and that kind of thing. The one other club I want to shout out, especially for anyone who's looking at kind of going into engineering or science, is the Carleton Engineering Society. So they're a club within engineering specifically. I think I said the Carleton Engineering Society. I meant the Engiqueering Society. And they're a club specifically for LGBT engineering and design students, but they're open to anyone on campus. And they're more of a purely social club than the GSRC, which does have kind of a education and social activism angle to it as well.
Awesome. Well, we will leave it at that. But if there are any more questions, please continue asking those questions. Jamie's going to stick around and we'll hop on the Q&A to type out their answers. So Jamie, I want to thank you so much for spending some time with us. It was great to see you again and great to hear from you again, and hope you continue to stay safe during these COVID times, and hopefully to see you on campus at some point next year.
Yeah, so nice to see you, Sten. Thanks so much.
And so before we officially wrap things up, we want to say thank you to all of you for tuning in and for your great questions. And we want to remind you that admissions.carleton.ca is the website you want to go on to get more information about everything really admission related, but especially our Live at 5 events. Next Wednesday, we're talking your career, your future. We're talking about what type of jobs are out there and how we can connect you to the skills that you'll need in order to get those awesome jobs when you graduate. So definitely tune into that conversation. Keep checking 360.carleton.ca for more event information for you to be able to register for our Live at 5s and other events that are coming up. And of course, we're on social media at Carleton_future, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. So definitely give us a follow for some really great content. All right, so my name is Stanley Philippe. Again, thank you all for tuning in this evening. I hope you have a great night, and we hope to see you at Carleton in the fall. Take care.